and welcome to this video in which I'm building the Airfix Jaguar E-Type starter set in 1/32 scale. If you enjoy it and find it useful, please remember to like the video below, and while you're there, why not subscribe to my channel to see other builds along with tips and tricks for anyone starting out in model making. Being a starter set, this kit is classed as skill level 1 and comes with 1 flying hour. Now if you're a member of the Airfix Club, you can collect these flying hours towards a free kit. The packaging has all the extras blister packed on the outside. The paints include a pale tan, a leather brown, gunmetal, black, red and silver. The brushes you get are a Humbrol number 4 for the large areas and a number 0 for the details, and there's also a tube of polystyrene cement. The box opens at the end. Let's see what's inside here. So we have the plastic parts are here. There's the main body shell, underside, boots, wheels, suspension and so on and so forth. There's a lot of flash on these, this extra stuff, but we'll have a look at that in a second. There's an awful lot on here. That's because this is quite an old mould. We also have the transparent parts here for the front and rear windscreen. The rear windscreen is incorporated into the hood design here. We have a teeny tiny sheet of decals, basically just the number plate. I think these are dials for the dashboard and a road fund license, a tax disc, which we don't have to have these days. It's all done electronically. And of course, the instructions. Usual sort of standard of Airfix instructions, fairly clear, a bit more sort of heavy and blobby, so I guess they're probably quite old design. But they tell you what to do straightforwardly enough, so not too bad. Let's get on with the build then. Now with every kit we make, the first thing we need to do is give the body and all the other parts a good wash in a very gentle detergent solution. So 2 or 3 drops of washing up liquid in a cup of water. Just give them a wash over like this. The reason why we do this is that the moulding process can leave some oily residue on the parts, and this just cleans it off. It's something that will prevent any paint sticking if you have that on. So give everything a quick rinse over with some soapy water, then rinse it off and let it dry. Something that doesn't come with the kit, and I really do suggest you get some, is an acrylic primer, just a plain grey primer to spray your kit first. This will really help the paint stick to the plastic surface. I use it on every kit. You don't have to necessarily have the Humbrol one, as long as it's an acrylic primer and it's designed for plastics. That's the important thing. Okay, so something I just wanted to mention now is you'll see reviews, they talk about flash quite a lot on injection moulded plastic like this, and you can see some flash here and here, and it's on the wheel rims here. And what this is where the moulds, 2 halves of the moulds get together, they inject the hot plastic between them, and if the moulds are old, then sometimes these edges are a little worn and the plastic leaks into them. It's not the end of the world because the actual mouldings are still pretty crisp, but it's just that like occasionally you have to knock out bits of plastic, clean them up and things like that. Okay, so that's what flash is, if we mention that, if you hear that mentioned elsewhere. It's like excess pieces of plastic from the moulding process, typically when the moulds are a little bit older. Flash like this is best sanded away, although you can use a craft knife for larger pieces if you're careful. I remove pieces from the sprue with these modelling nippers, but any sharp pointed cutters will do. Any residue is sanded away. You can use a nail file if you like, but I make my own sanding sticks. You can find out more in my 10 top tips video. The paints in these starter kits can be a bit variable, some are much thicker than others. If you find it too thick, just let it down with a drop or two of water. You can use the lid to make sure the paint is the right consistency and load your brush. You will need thicker paint if you've chosen not to prime the model first. Work the paint into the surface where there's any texture and smooth with longer strokes. You can always do more than one coat, so don't overdo it. Some of the paints will have split whilst in storage. The pigment and the binders separate. You just need to give them a good stir first. A toothpick or a cocktail stick is ideal. Some of the medium-sized parts, like these seats, I paint with them stuck to an old bit of wood with some blue tack. It makes them easier to hold and manoeuvre and paint from all angles. Smaller pieces like this gear stick I tend to paint while they're still on the sprue. Here I'm painting a leather colour, later I'll detail it in with a bit of a metal colour on the shaft and a black top. Now when the seats are painted in this leather colour they can look a little bit flat. A trick to make them look a bit more 3D is to use some very dilute black paint from your kit. Use it as a wash to fill in the deeper cracks and lines to give a bit of extra shading. Any excess can be picked up on a brush that has been dried on a bit of tissue or kitchen roll first. Once you're happy with these shadows, mix a little of the leather colour with the pale tan that comes with the kit and just touch up some of the edges. This gives a highlight. Wherever you create shadows, try and create a highlight as well. Back to construction now, and we start with the front suspension. I put in the lower wishbones first as they form a base. Then the hubs fit between these and the upper wishbones. The upper wishbone sits horizontally in one piece. This helps set the angle of the lower wishbones automatically. A pot of the paint supplied in the kit is enough weight to keep everything in place while the glue sets. This steering arm completes the front end of the build. We'll touch up all the paint later on. When the suspension's all dried up, I fit the gear stick and the seats into the tub. The next part is the rear suspension. Now the first thing you've got to do here is attach the 4 coil springs. They're a little bit fiddly, so I'm using tweezers. Those done, I box in the diff and rear axle with these cross members, and the rear suspension assembly is also done. Onto the wheels next, and they do need a lot of cleaning up. Now I normally use a 320 or 400 grit paper for sanding, but here I'm using a 150 grit as the result is a little rougher and more like a used tyre. I use toothpicks to hold the wheels while I paint them. I paint the sides into the rim first, then touch up the treads before doing the other side and filling in any gaps. The toothpicks stick into bits of Pludac on my wooden stick while drying. Next I paint the brake discs in silver with the calipers touched up in black. Then I apply silver to the rims. I go along the rims first and then fill in the rest. Push into each corner to make sure it's all covered. Now if you hold the piece at the right angle to the light, you can see very clearly if you've missed any bits. The wheels then go onto the hubs. The first at the front is the brake disc, then the wheel itself, followed by this small retaining nut. Do the same with the rear suspension off the car, except you don't get a brake disc on there. Next I can add the radiator at the front of the chassis. The chassis is pretty much complete, so onto some bodywork, and these lights are going into the lower half of the nose. Next I'm going to paint the inside surfaces of the doors with bodywork red colour on the frame and pale tan in the middle. Both of these colours need 2 or 3 coats to look right. I then add silver accents to the door handle and window lever. The instrument panel is a strange mix of red and gunmetal. Now I pick out the dials in black paint and the switches beneath them in silver. Back to the lower nose piece, and I paint the inside of that in black and the lights themselves with silver. That done, I can glue the nose together. The fit isn't fantastic, but the joints will sand down later. The lower rear shell can be fitted to the body too. While the bodywork's setting, I'll paint the hood, and most of the hood is black with just the rear window area left clear. Another detailed job to get out the way is setting the decals into the speedometer and tachometer on the dash. Now we'll paint the body. This will take time, as I found I needed 3 coats to get the red even close to what it should be. Just be patient, don't use too much at once, and try to vary the angle of your strokes to reduce brush marks. The last coat can actually be thinned with a tiny bit of water to get a bit of a better finish. With the body paint dry, I'm starting final assembly. First I'm going to fit the inner door panels. These just slot into place. Next I fit the dashboard just under the front coaming. Then the rear suspension unit goes into place. The beams sit around a raised rectangle in the moulding of the body. Then this gets closed off with the rest of the underside, which includes the front suspension. You can see now how the paint lines match up nicely, having painted both in advance. When all the bodywork is set, the exhaust can go underneath. The silencers at the rear have small pegs to locate them into the underside of the rear body. Then I can add the steering wheel. This is painted silver with a leather rim. It slots very easily into a hole in the dash. Now for some trim, all pre-painted on the sprue in silver. The rear bumper comes in 2 pieces, while the front bumper comes as a single piece. I've painted the edge of the windscreen silver, and this glues into place next. Then the top can go on. I'll touch up the detailing in the paint a bit later. Then comes the rear light cluster. I've painted the back of these lights in silver, leaving the front clear. Now later I'll add some transparent red and orange colours, as I perhaps have them in my paint box, but you don't have to do that. The headlamp covers can be a bit tricky to put on just with your fingers, so I use some blue tack and a cocktail stick to help me place them. The blue tack comes off later when the glue has dried. Then the tiny indicators go on the side of the front, again painted silver on the back to look like they've got a reflector. And finally the decals go on. First a tax disc on the windscreen. Younger model makers won't know there was a time when we had to buy this disc every year to show we'd paid the road fund. It's all done online now. Then there are the registration plates, and famously the front ones on an E-Type were at the limit of how far laid back a registration plate could be and still remain visible to the authorities. Add a final black wash to the wheels to bring out the spokes, and the kit is complete. Now, given that the tooling for this was made at the same type as the E-Types were made themselves in the 60s, and the moulds are showing signs of being very tired, I think this still manages to do justice to the most beautiful car ever built, and it's a very good project for any beginner. Would make a really good present. If you've enjoyed this build and maybe picked up a tip or two, then please remember to like the video below. Also, remember to subscribe to my channel to see other builds and new projects as they arrive. There's even a link to buy me a cup of coffee if you like. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.